I've shot over 100 weddings. You'd think by now I'd be desensitized to them. The awkward toasts, the teary moms, the sweaty uncles doing the worm on the dance floor. But this one was different. And not just because it was on a vineyard in Northern California, or because the bride's dog was the ring bearer. No, it was different because of Drew, the groom. I met him the day before the ceremony during the walkthrough. I was there early, scoping out light and locations. I was leaning down in the middle of a gravel path, testing some backlighting with my hand when I heard footsteps behind me. When I looked up, he was standing there, tan, laughing, wearing a linen shirt unbuttoned at the top and holding 2 coffees. "You must be Eli," he said, handing me one. I figured anyone crouched in the dirt at 8 a.m. with that kind of intensity had to be the photographer. I blinked, caught completely off guard. "Yeah, that's me. You must be." "Drew," he said, grinning like we were already friends. "The lucky guy." I took the coffee, trying not to stare. He was handsome, sure, but it was more than that. He had this warmth about him, this easy way of making you feel like you belonged, even if you were just the hired help with muddy knees. "Thanks for this," I said, lifting the cup. "Most grooms are MIA until someone drags them out of bed." He shrugged. "I get anxious sitting still. Figured I'd walk the grounds, see where all the magic happens." We walked together after that, him pointing out places he thought would look good in photos, me pretending not to notice how he smelled like cedarwood and sunshine. I was doing my best to keep things professional, but the longer we talked, the harder it got. There were little things. The way he said my name when he asked questions. The way he listened, really listened, when I talked about light and timing. The way he laughed when I joked that every groomsman secretly fears boutonnieres. By the time we looped back to the main house, I felt like I'd known him for weeks instead of 20 minutes. "You ever get tired of weddings?" he asked, leaning against the porch railing. "Sometimes," I said honestly, "but then there's always a moment that reminds me why I keep doing it." He raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" I thought about it. "The quiet stuff. A look someone gives when they think no one's watching. A second where it's just real." Drew's smile faltered a little, his gaze drifting. "Yeah, real's the good stuff." I had no idea what that meant at the time, but by the end of that weekend I would. The rest of the day was a blur of logistics and setup. I met his fiancée, Rachel. Beautiful, poised, very into eucalyptus table runners. She seemed nice enough, though there was a stiffness to her smile when she talked about Drew. Like she was describing someone she hadn't fully figured out. Maybe I was projecting, I don't know. That night, I found myself lying awake in my Airbnb, scrolling through previews of the shots I'd taken that afternoon. There was one of Drew, laughing at something out of frame. Sun hitting his face just right. He looked happy, and not the fake wedding kind. The real kind. I stared at the photo longer than I should have, and then I turned off my phone, rolled onto my side, and told myself to knock it the hell off. But it didn't end there. Not even close. The morning of the wedding started early. I arrived at the vineyard just after sunrise, the mist still clinging to the hills, the air sharp with dew and the scent of crushed grapes. There's something sacred about that, quiet before a wedding, the way everything hums with expectation. I was moving through the motions, charging batteries, cleaning lenses, triple-checking the shot list, but my head was a mess because of him, Drew. I told myself it was a harmless crush. It happens sometimes, being around people at their most radiant, their most loved. Emotions run high, and when someone's kind to you in the chaos of it all, your brain fills in blanks it shouldn't. I knew how to separate those feelings. Or at least, I used to. But when I saw Drew again that morning, standing by the rows of grapevines, dressed in a white shirt and suspenders, hair still wet from the shower, all that rational thinking cracked a little. He spotted me and waved. "You weren't kidding about the light being best in the morning," he said, nodding toward the sun just starting to burn through the fog. "Told you," I said, lifting my camera without even thinking. He froze, then laughed. "God, I'm not even dressed yet. You're ruthless. You're golden in this light. Just hold still." He rolled his eyes but stood there, letting me snap a few shots. Candid, natural, everything I wish more people gave me without begging. And then he stepped closer, lowering his voice. You know, you never told me your story, I blinked. My story? Yeah, how someone gets into photographing other people's weddings. Feels a little masochistic, doesn't it? That caught me off guard. You mean like because I'm single? Exactly. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You spend your weekends watching other people find their forever? Doesn't that mess with your head? I shrugged, slipping my lens cap back on. Sometimes, but it also makes me feel connected, I guess. Like maybe love's still real, you know? Not just something we scroll past. Drew looked at me for a long second. You're kind of a romantic, huh? I laughed quietly. Occupational hazard. Before he could respond, a groomsman called him over to deal with a missing tie. He winked at me, actually winked, and jogged off, leaving me standing there like an idiot, heart suddenly way too loud in my chest. For the next few hours, I stayed busy. I shot Rachel getting ready in the bridal suite, her mom fussing over her makeup, her sister crying over an old hairpin. I captured the florist arranging last-minute centerpieces, the guests starting to trickle in, the DJ struggling to get his speakers working. But I kept catching glimpses of Drew, laughing with his dad, holding his nephew on his shoulders, pacing near the ceremony arch with a drink in hand and a faraway look in his eyes. And each time I saw him, something inside me shifted. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way, just a quiet ache, the kind you don't know what to do with. By the time the ceremony started, the sun was high and hot, casting long shadows across the rows of white chairs. The vines behind the altar swayed gently in the breeze, and a string quartet played something soft and sweet. I took my place near the front, kneeling just off the aisle, lens ready. The music swelled. Drew turned toward the aisle, and I watched as Rachel began her walk down, smiling stiffly, bouquet trembling slightly in her hands. Drew didn't smile. I was close enough to see his throat move as he swallowed, close enough to see how his hands clenched at his sides. And I don't know, maybe I was reading too much into it, but it didn't look like a man watching the love of his life walk toward him. It looked like a man watching something he couldn't stop. I kept shooting, mechanically, like I always do, because it's not my job to interpret, it's my job to capture. So I did. The kiss, the applause, the first walk back up the aisle as husband and wife. I photographed it all. And then I followed the wedding party to the reception, which was already buzzing with champagne and clinking glasses and speeches waiting to happen. I kept to the edges, as I always do, blending in, doing the work. I got shots of the cake, the table decor, the bride laughing with her father. I was in the zone. Or at least, I was trying to be, until Drew found me again. He was alone now, holding a half-empty glass, his tie already loosened. He leaned against a wooden post near the back of the tent and said, "You looked pissed during the ceremony." I blinked. What? You looked tense. Is that a photography thing, or were you judging me? I wasn't judging, I said quickly. Just observing. He nodded slowly. And what did you observe? I hesitated. Then, because I'm an idiot, I said it. You didn't look happy. He didn't answer right away, just took a sip, staring out over the vineyard. Can I ask you something? He said after a long beat. Sure. Do you believe it's possible to marry someone and know, deep down, that it isn't right? I should have said something neutral. I should have nodded politely and moved on. But I didn't. I looked at him, really looked, and I said, yeah, I think it happens more than people admit. He looked back at me, eyes suddenly more open than they had any right to be. And just like that, I knew I was in trouble. The rest of the night blurred together in the way most weddings do, clinking forks on glasses, slightly offbeat first dances, people getting bolder with every passed flute of champagne. But I wasn't really there anymore. Not mentally. I kept shooting, nodding politely when guests asked for photos, smiling when someone said I had the best job ever. But every few minutes, my eyes would find Drew, and I'd catch him looking back. Not always, but enough. I told myself it didn't mean anything, that maybe he was just the kind of guy who made everyone feel like the center of attention. But the more I watched, the more I saw the way his smiles fell too fast. The way he kept finding reasons to step away from his new wife, as if he couldn't quite bring himself to play the part for too long. At one point, after the mother-son dance, I saw Rachel place a hand on his back, something small, nothing romantic, and Drew flinched. It was subtle, a blink and you'd miss it kind of thing. But I didn't miss it, and suddenly, I was more than curious. I was worried. I didn't know Drew. Not really. I'd only spoken to him a handful of times, knew almost nothing about his past, his relationship, his reasons for doing any of this. But my gut told me something wasn't right. And that feeling stayed with me all through the toasts. His best man gave the usual speech. Embarrassing college story, heartfelt line about finding your person, a toast to forever. Rachel's maid of honor cried through most of hers, getting every name wrong and ending with a high-pitched, "To love!" Then it was Drew's turn. He stood, cleared his throat, and raised his glass. "I'm not great with speeches," he said. "You all probably figured that out when I started writing mine on a napkin this morning." There was a soft wave of laughter. Rachel looked up at him, smiling tightly. "But," he went on, "I do know how to say thank you. And I want to say it to every single person here who's meant something to me and Rachel, who's helped shape us, who's shown up for us." He paused. "I hope this day means as much to all of you as it means to us." Another pause, slightly longer this time. He looked out over the crowd, and his eyes landed on me. Just for a second. I don't know if anyone else noticed. Probably not. But in that second, the air left my lungs. And then he looked away, raised his glass again, and said, "To love." To love, everyone echoed. I didn't move. I didn't drink. I just stood there, heart thudding, like I'd been called out in front of a crowd, like my body knew something before my brain did. I spent the rest of the reception in a weird haze. I took photos. I edited a few at a side table. I turned down cake. I politely laughed when a drunk aunt cornered me and said I looked like her son's single gay coworker in LA. But I kept watching Drew, and at one point, maybe around 10, he vanished. Just gone. I checked the dance floor, the bar, the smoking area by the side tent. Nothing. Rachel didn't seem to notice. Or if she did, she didn't care. And for reasons I still can't fully explain, I grabbed my camera, slipped out of the tent, and started walking toward the vines. There was a path that looped around the vineyard, past the barrels, through a few rows of grapes, and toward the edge of the property where a low wooden fence marked the start of the woods. And that's where I found him. Drew. Sitting on the fence, tie loose, shirt unbuttoned at the collar, staring up at the stars like the wedding behind us hadn't even happened. He heard me approaching, but didn't turn. "Knew you'd find me," he said quietly. I stopped a few feet away. "Wasn't trying to." "Sure you weren't." There was no heat in his voice, just tiredness. "Not a fan of your own reception?" I asked, trying to keep it light. He shrugged. "I've been to enough weddings to know how they go. Dance, cake, bad speeches, the one guy who strips during, shout, I've seen it. You're the groom." "So I'm told." I moved closer. Not too close. "Is this where you admit you made a mistake?" He glanced at me. His expression wasn't angry, just hollow. "I don't know if it's a mistake," he said, "but it doesn't feel like what it's supposed to." There was a long silence after that, the kind where you know something's hanging in the air, but you're both too afraid to say it. "You're the first person all day who didn't pretend," he said eventually. "Pretend?" He nodded. "Everyone kept looking at us like we were, I don't know, a movie couple, like if they clapped hard enough, the ending would write itself." I leaned against the fence beside him, careful not to touch. "And you don't feel like the movie couple?" He snorted. "We barely feel like a trailer." I looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time, I saw someone unraveling. Not dramatically, not in some big, messy, falling apart kind of way, but quietly. The kind of unraveling you only notice if you're really paying attention. He ran a hand through his hair. "I don't know what the hell I'm doing." "You don't have to have it figured out tonight." "I married her," he said flatly. "That kind of implies I should have figured it out already. And then he looked at me, full on. And it wasn't flirtatious. It wasn't romantic. It was just honest. I don't think I'm in love with her. I didn't know what to say. My heart was thudding. My mouth was dry. But before I could speak, he stood, brushing his hands off on his pants. "You should go," he said. "Get some rest." And with that, he walked back toward the lights of the reception, leaving me alone with the sound of the crickets and the distant music. I stood there a long time after he left. And I knew, deep down, nothing about this job would ever be the same again. The next morning, I woke up in my tiny Airbnb with a hangover that had nothing to do with alcohol. I hadn't even drunk at the reception, not a drop, but my head was pounding, my chest felt tight, and all I could think about was the look in Drew's eyes when he said, "I don't think I'm in love with her." I replayed it a dozen times while packing up my gear. I tried to tell myself it wasn't my business, that I was just the guy with the camera, a witness, a professional. But something about that conversation had stuck under my skin, sharp and impossible to ignore. When I pulled into the vineyard to grab my last few things and deliver the preliminary photo set to the planner, the place was almost deserted. The tents were half taken down, the dance floor littered with wilted petals and forgotten heels. I was halfway through transferring files on my laptop when I heard footsteps behind me. "Morning." I didn't even have to turn around. That voice, low, rough from too little sleep, was burned into my memory already. "Hey," I said, glancing back. "You survived." "Barely." He smiled, but it was faint, forced. His hair was still damp, shirt untucked, and he looked human. Not groom polished, just a guy who hadn't slept much. I tried to focus on the screen. "Everything go okay after I left?" "Define okay." I looked up. He was watching me carefully, leaning against the wooden post beside the barn, holding a paper cup of coffee like he didn't know what to do with his hands. "She was quiet," he said finally. "Didn't talk much. I think she could tell I wasn't there." "That's..." I started, then stopped. There was nothing I could say that wouldn't sound loaded. He beat me to it. "I shouldn't be saying this to you. You're just..." "The photographer," I said for him. He exhaled a laugh, short and tired. "Yeah, exactly." For a second, neither of us said anything. The only sound was the low hum of cicadas and the metallic click of my hard drive saving files. Then he said, "You want breakfast?" It was such a casual, stupid question that I blinked at him. "You want breakfast?" he repeated, pushing off the post. "There's a cafe down the road. Pancakes, terrible coffee, locals who don't mind if you sit there for hours." I hesitated. Every rule in my head screamed, "No, don't blur lines, don't get personal, don't make yourself part of the story." But then I looked at him, standing there, shoulders slumped, wedding ring, catching the morning light, and something in me said yes. "Yeah," I heard myself say, "sure." The cafe was one of those small town places that smelled like syrup and nostalgia. We sat in a booth by the window. Sunlight cutting through dusty blinds, the world outside slow and quiet. Drew ordered black coffee. I ordered tea, because my hands were already shaking. He stared out the window for a long time before saying, "You ever do something because you thought it was the right thing? And halfway through, realize you were just afraid to do the wrong thing?" I looked up from my mug. "That sounds like every adult decision I've ever made." That got a small laugh out of him. "Yeah, exactly." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Rachel and I, we've been together since college. 6 years. Everyone expected us to get married eventually, so when I proposed, it felt like checking off a box. Like, this is what comes next. And yesterday you realized maybe it wasn't?" He met my eyes then, and it was like the air shifted between us. I think I realized it a long time ago. Yesterday I just stopped lying to myself about it. I didn't know what to say. I'd been behind the camera for dozens of those moments. The look of pure certainty when someone said I do. But Drew's words hit me in a way I hadn't felt before. "So what now?" I asked quietly. He shrugged. "No idea. She's staying with her family for a few days." I told her I needed to clear my head. And you're here? Yeah. He smiled faintly. Guess I didn't want to be alone. There it was again. That tiny, dangerous pull in my chest. He reached across the table, brushing a crumb off his plate, and for a second, our fingers almost touched. It was nothing, barely anything, but it set my pulse off like a match to dry grass. He noticed it too. I could see it in the way his breath hitched, the way his eyes flicked down for half a heartbeat before he looked away. Sorry, he said softly. I shouldn't. You've got a job. You're just trying to get through the weekend. It's fine, I lied, but it wasn't. It wasn't fine at all, because I couldn't stop noticing how his voice sounded when he said my name, how his wedding ring gleamed but looked wrong on his hand. I couldn't stop feeling like we were standing too close to something we couldn't unsee once we crossed it. We finished breakfast mostly in silence. When the bill came, he insisted on paying. I didn't argue. I was too busy trying to memorize the curve of his smile when he finally relaxed enough to laugh again. Outside, the morning air was warm and bright. He shoved his hands into his pockets and said, "You heading back to the city today?" "Yeah. Got a couple of shoots next week." He nodded. "You should send me some of the photos, if that's okay." "Of course," he hesitated. "Not just the wedding ones." That made me look at him. "What do you mean?" "The others," he said, a faint grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "The ones you took when I wasn't looking." I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. And then he smiled. A real one this time. Before walking away, leaving me standing there on the sidewalk, watching him go. I didn't know it then, but that wasn't the end. Not even close. Because a week later, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Drew, hey, it's me. You around next weekend?" I stared at the message for a long time. You around next weekend? It was simple, casual even, but it felt loaded, like someone tossing a stone into still water just to see how far the ripples would go. I didn't reply right away. I told myself to be smart, to keep distance. Drew was married. Whatever had passed between us, whatever electricity had cracked the air open during our conversations, it wasn't supposed to mean anything. It couldn't. That's what I told myself, anyway. But the truth was, I hadn't stopped thinking about him. Not once since I'd driven away from that vineyard. I hadn't looked at the wedding photos yet either. Not properly. I'd skimmed through to make sure they were technically sound, but I hadn't let myself sit with them. Because I knew what I'd find, and I wasn't ready to face it. But Drew? Drew didn't seem to be following any of those unspoken rules I was so carefully trying to keep. So, 2 hours later, after making and deleting 5 different drafts of a response, I typed, "Yeah, I'm around." His reply came almost instantly. "Cool. I'll be in town Saturday. You free in the afternoon?" "I can be. What's up?" There was a pause. And then, "Just want to talk." Saturday arrived faster than I expected. I spent the morning pacing my apartment, cleaning things that didn't need cleaning, reorganizing my bookshelves twice. I told myself it was nothing, just a catch-up. Just a weird kind of post-wedding check-in with a conflicted groom who hadn't figured out how to say what he was feeling. But when I heard the knock on my door around 2 p.m., my heart did this stupid skipping thing like it was auditioning for a teenage rom-com. I opened the door, and there he was. No suit, no tie, no wedding crowd, just Drew. In jeans and a plain black t-shirt, hair tousled like he hadn't bothered to style it, eyes a little tired, but warm. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey." He stepped inside, hands in his pockets. "This place is nice. Very you." I raised an eyebrow. "You don't know me well enough to say that." He smirked. "Maybe I want to." That caught me off guard. I closed the door, trying to ignore the way the air between us felt instantly heavier, charged in a way I'd been trying to forget all week. "Can I get you something? Water? Coffee?" I offered. He shook his head. "I'm good." We stood there for a beat too long, both of us unsure how to start. Finally, I gestured toward the couch. "Sit." He did. Slowly, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to. I sat opposite him in the armchair, keeping a careful distance. Professional. Safe. Even though nothing about this situation felt professional or safe. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and stared at the floor. I haven't been able to stop thinking about it, he said finally. About the wedding? No, he said, eyes lifting to meet mine. About you. I felt that in my chest. A sharp jolt of something I didn't have a name for. He kept going. I don't know what that says about me, or what it means, but I keep replaying our conversations. The stuff you said. The way you looked at me like you saw me when no one else did. Drew! I started, but he held up a hand. I know, he said. I'm married. I know how this looks. And I'm not here to make excuses or ask for something I don't deserve. He took a deep breath. But I also can't pretend it didn't happen, that I didn't feel something that day, something I wasn't expecting. I didn't know what to say. My thoughts were a tangle of boundaries, ethics, emotions I hadn't sorted out. He leaned back, suddenly looking more tired than anything. I've been with Rachel a long time. We're good at being seen together. We look right on paper. But the truth is, he paused, I've never felt like I could really be myself with her. Not fully. And with me? I asked quietly. With you, he said. I didn't feel like I had to perform. The silence that followed was thick and strange. Like the moment before a storm hits, when the whole world holds its breath. I shifted forward slightly. Are you telling me this because you want something from me, or because you don't know what else to do with it? He gave a small, bitter laugh. Probably both. Then he looked at me, and everything in his expression changed. Look, I'm not asking for a relationship, or for you to wait around while I figure my shit out. That wouldn't be fair. But I wanted to see you. One more time. Without the noise, without the vows, and the fake smiles, and the pressure. I nodded slowly. Okay. He watched me carefully. Okay. I get it, I said. You needed to say it out loud. That's fair. We sat in silence for another minute. Then I stood and walked to the kitchen, needing something to do. I poured a glass of water just to give my hands a task. When I turned back around, Drew was standing too, watching me. I think I need to leave her, he said. I froze. He continued. Not because of you. Not because I'm trying to chase something that may not be real, but because I finally admitted to myself that I've been lying to her, to my family, to myself, for years. I set the glass down slowly. That's a big thing to say. I know. And a bigger thing to do. He nodded. I haven't told her yet. I wanted to be sure I wasn't running away from something, or toward something that wasn't real. He stepped closer, just enough that I could smell his cologne, something woodsy and clean. I still don't know what this is between us, but I know it's not fake. I swallowed. It's not. He exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing just a little. I don't know what happens next, he said. Me either, I replied. Then, before I could think better of it, I reached out. Not to kiss him, not yet. Just to place a hand on his arm. He didn't pull away. If anything, he stepped closer. And for the first time, we let the silence between us be something else. Not awkward, not unsure, but full of possibility. I didn't expect to see him again the next day. After that heavy conversation, I figured it would take Drew time. Time to think, to retreat, to get lost in his head the way people do when they're standing on the edge of something life-altering. But around noon, while I was editing photos at my desk, my intercom buzzed. It's Drew, he said, his voice quieter than usual. I buzzed him in without a word. Seconds later, he was standing in my doorway again, shoulders tense, eyes unreadable. I told her, he said. I just stared at him. Told her what? That I can't be with her anymore, that I married her for the wrong reasons, that I've been lying to both of us." He paused. "I told her I think I might be gay." My breath caught. Not from surprise exactly. Somewhere deep down, I suspected. There was too much in the way Drew looked at me, in the way he held on to silence like it was hiding something important. But hearing him say it aloud was something else entirely. "How did she take it?" I asked, cautiously. He walked past me, sitting down heavily on my couch like the words had physically drained him. "She cried," he said. "Got quiet. Didn't yell, didn't throw anything. Just stared at me like she didn't recognize me anymore." I sat beside him, not too close, giving him room. "I didn't say your name," he added. "It wasn't about you. It's been about me for a long time. This part of me I've been shoving into a dark corner and pretending wasn't real." I nodded, staying silent, letting him talk. "I used to think I was just confused, that everyone feels things sometimes, notices people, but I never let myself look too closely. And then I met you and it was like—" He cut himself off, rubbed his face hard like he was trying to scrub away the admission. "It was like, what?" I asked quietly. He dropped his hands into his lap. Like, I couldn't ignore it anymore. That silence returned, not heavy this time, but thick with something else. Something slow-burning and electric. "I don't expect you to jump into anything with me," he said finally. "I know how it looks. I know it's messy. But I just needed you to know the truth. I didn't want to disappear and leave you wondering. You didn't owe me that," I said. "But I appreciate it." We sat like that for a while, two men on opposite ends of a couch, both a little broken, both a little unsure of what came next. And then he looked over at me, eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. "I don't know what I'm doing," he said, "but I know I want to do it with you." It wasn't a line. It wasn't polished or romantic. It was raw, honest, and it hit me right in the chest. "I don't know what I'm doing either," I admitted. "But I haven't stopped thinking about you since the vineyard." His expression shifted, like something inside him unclenched. He reached for my hand, and I let him. His fingers were warm, calloused from years of building things. Physical things, not emotional ones. Maybe this was the first time he'd started building something for himself. When our hands touched, it wasn't like a movie. No swelling music, no perfectly timed lighting. But it was real, and that mattered more. He leaned in, slow, hesitant. I could have pulled away, could have told him to wait to figure things out first, but I didn't, because I wanted to know what it felt like, to kiss someone who wasn't pretending. His lips were soft, unsure, but there was intention behind the way he touched me, like he was trying to say all the things he hadn't had words for until now. The kiss deepened gradually. No urgency, just the quiet, grounding reality of it. When we finally pulled back, he didn't speak. He just looked at me with this wide-eyed, slightly stunned expression, like he couldn't believe it had actually happened. Like maybe, for the first time in a long time, he felt something that made sense. We sat in silence again, but this time it was comfortable, full. Eventually, he stood. "I should go," he said. "Let you breathe. I didn't come here to do that. I just needed to be honest." "You don't have to go," I said, barely above a whisper. He gave me a crooked smile. "I know, but I want to do this right. No secrets, no pressure." And for the first time since I met him, Drew looked free. Drew didn't come over the next day, or the one after that. And even though I told myself not to expect anything, I couldn't help the way my chest tightened every time my phone lit up, hoping, then deflating, when it wasn't him. I knew he needed time. He was untangling years of a life he'd built on top of silence. That's not something you undo in a weekend. Still, the longer the quiet stretched, the more I started to doubt whether what we'd shared was real or just a moment. The kind that burns bright and then disappears before you know what it meant. Then, a week later, I got a text. No preamble. "Are you home?" "Yeah. Can I come over?" 15 minutes later, there was a knock. When I opened the door, Drew was standing there, wind-blown and wide-eyed, like he'd been running through thoughts faster than he could catch them. He was wearing a hoodie and jeans, a duffel bag slung over one shoulder. "Hey," I said, heart already picking up speed. "Hey." He stepped inside, slowly, quietly, like my apartment was holy ground, and he wasn't sure if he was allowed to tread on it yet. I closed the door behind him. "Everything okay?" He dropped the bag at his feet and looked at me. Really looked. "I signed the annulment papers this morning." I blinked. "You what?" He nodded, swallowing. We both knew it was the right thing. Rachel was hurt, yeah. But she told me something that stuck. She said it's better to be wounded by the truth than comforted by a lie. I let that sink in. It didn't make what happened between them easy or clean, but it made it honest. And that mattered. "She deserves someone who can love her the way she wants to be loved," he said. And I couldn't do that. Because I was pretending. Because I've been pretending for most of my life. He stepped closer. His eyes were clear, his voice steady. "I'm tired of pretending." I nodded, throat tight. "So what now?" He took a breath, looked down at the bag by his feet. "I booked a short-term place near the park. Gonna stay there for a bit, figure things out. Therapy, maybe? Conversations I've been putting off with my parents." "And me?" I asked. He smiled, soft, not rushed. I want to take slow. I don't want this to be some rebound cliche. I don't want to ruin the first thing that's felt real in years by dragging you through my mess." He paused, then added, "But I want to be in your life, if you'll have me." I stared at him, this man who I'd first met laughing in the sun with a beer in hand. A man I thought I was just supposed to photograph, capture for a client, then forget. But somehow, between shutter clicks and stolen glances, we'd landed here. "I want that too," I said quietly. "I don't need labels. I don't need a perfect timeline. I just want you to be honest with me. And with yourself." He stepped closer, now just inches away. "I can do that," he said. "For the first time in my life, I want to do that." He reached up, slow and tentative, his fingers brushing my cheek. I leaned into his touch without thinking. This kiss wasn't like the first one. It was sure. No hesitation. No rush. Just Drew and me, breathing in sync, finding something solid between the uncertainty and the fallout. After, we stood there for a long time, wrapped in silence. But it wasn't empty. It was full of everything we didn't need to say. He didn't stay that night. And I was okay with that. Because what we were building wasn't about grand gestures or running into each other's arms. It was about staying. About showing up. Again and again, even when it was hard. The next few weeks were slow. Coffee dates where we talked about everything but the past. Walks that turned into handholds. Texts that turned into long phone calls before bed. He started showing up in photos I wasn't even trying to take, caught mid-laugh in the corner of my frame, or looking at me like I was the most interesting thing in the room. And one afternoon, sitting across from him at a food truck picnic table, he reached for my hand without thinking. That's when I knew we were going to be okay. It's been 6 months. Drew's still figuring things out, with his family, with himself, with who he wants to be. But now he's doing it out loud. He's met some of my friends. We've been to a few low-key parties, nothing big. We're not rushing into the spotlight. And yeah, I've taken more pictures of him than I probably should admit. The funny thing is, none of those shots are posed. He's always just being. And maybe that's the most beautiful thing about it. For years, he lived a life framed by expectation. Now, for the first time, he's stepping into the frame on his own terms. And me? Well, I fell for the groom, but I stayed for the man he's becoming.